And a literary incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, is particularly worshipped. Veda Vyas, or Vyasadeva, it's more like a generic term. There's different Vyasadevas in each millennium. The one of this particular millennium was called Krishna Dvaipayana Vyasa. So, of course, the spiritual master is worshipped every day, traditionally in the morning, at noon, and in the evening, what's called the Tridandi, or the three junctions of the day. That is, between the night and the day, or the dawn, time of creation of Brahma. Then the noontime, that's, between the creation and the dissolution, represented by the maintainer, Lord Vishnu. And at the last junction between the day and the coming night, time of Shiva. So, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in his Gavashtakam, verse 7, things like that. Dhyayam stuvams tasya yasyash trisandhyam vandegaro sri charanarvindam. I worship the lotus feet of the Divine Master, ever singing his glories and meditating upon him at the three junctions of the day. In fact, this bhajan, Sri Gurvashtakam, gives a very clear and comprehensive, we can never say finished, version of the glories of the spiritual master, which can't be limited, and it's very helpful, that particular bhajan, to memorize it. He had a very systematic way of thought, Vishwanath Chakravarti, explaining things. Just as the glories of the infinite Lord himself are limited, and it is said Lord Ananta Shesh, the plenary expansion of Baladev, with all his strength cannot, we are told, ever reach their end, despite singing them with his thousands of mouths, since all eternity, so the glories of the spiritual master are similarly unlimited. So this worship and honour of the spiritual master has to be very, as the song, the bhajan says, make the desire of the spiritual master one with your heart. And one time one devotee asked Srila Sridhar Maharaj, what service can I do for you? He's probably expecting some kind of practical thing, or do the gardening or help them in the kitchen or something. And he thought for a moment and he said, if you can understand what I'm for, what is my purpose in life, my aim in life, my aspiration, all these things, and you can harmonize with that and do like that, then that will please me most. Ultimately, as Chakravarti Thakur says in his last verse of that Gurvashtakam, one who during the Brahma Muhurta, with meticulous regularity, wholeheartedly sings his 8 prayers to the spiritual master, attains upon leaving the body in his spiritual perfection the qualification to engage in the direct service of the Lord of Vrindavan. But of course, naturally, devotees will think of their spiritual master throughout the day, in every circumstance. As practitioners of Bhakti Yoga, according to Bhagavad Gita, as is the purpose of yoga in general, Srila Gurudev, Srila Govinda Maharaj, in Revealed Truth, this book here, he explains about the different yogas in Bhagavad Gita leading to and culminating in Bhakti Yoga, but all coming under the heading of Buddhi Yoga, engaging one's intelligence, one's consciousness in this idea of yoga, which is Yoga Shadmashu Koshalam, is the art of all work, is yoga. So the first thing being to not have attachment to the result, to work without attachment, and then to work for the pleasure of the other, of the Lord. So that means then in yoga, then the devotee would have even-mindedness, quote unquote, even-mindedness amongst pleasant and unpleasant events. So in the daily life, when experiencing the so-called pleasant events, then they won't try to enjoy them for themselves, but offer them to their guru, and see them as expressions of his mercy on them. And similarly, with the so-called unpleasant ones, they will take shelter more so of the spiritual master and try to see how they're being taught something valuable through this. In fact, for the disciple, the words and activities of the spiritual master, in a very real sense, have a greater value and sweetness for them than those of the Lord himself. Let me explain. As long as their adhikar, if we translate that as fitness for devotion, hasn't fully manifested itself, that is, to Svarup Siddhi, then it's the spiritual master, the direct representative of the Lord, an embodiment of divinity which carries and transmits everything of eternal existence, divine knowledge and spiritual sweetness to the devotee, to the disciple. And this often comes through the witnessing of the so-called human side of the Guru, where the apparent fallibility of the human condition somehow increases or magnifies these qualities for the disciple and makes the disciple more attached to the spiritual master.
Did you say fraternality? Fraternality?
Fallibility.
Oh, fallibility.
You know, like so-called human weaknesses, illness, and different things like that. So the Guru is always held in reverence by the disciple. Opportunity for service is given to them in many ways. For example, in the mood of Vatsalya or guardianship, as the example of Srila Govinda Maharaj, caring for Srila Guru Maharaj there, with medicine, with help, different things. So the principle of Guru Tattva is one of the four inconceivable tattvas. There's probably many more than that, but the four which have been given sort of theologically as specific to our line of thought and understanding. You know what the other three are? Anybody? Don't all shout at once. No? Go on. Shiva Tattva, yes. No, as I say, all these things you're saying, yes, they all can be considered inconceivable tattvas, but they're four specific.
It's Shiva Tattva,
yes,
and Dham Tattva, Vigraha Tattva, and also Guru Tattva. Those are the four.
Shiva Tattva, Nam Tattva,
and Dham.
Guru Tattva, and Dham Tattva, yeah.
Vigraha, deity.
Inconceivable tattva meaning, how is it that, for example, Nam Tattva, the name and the Lord are non-different, one non-different. How is that inconceivable? Shiva Tattva, Dham Tattva, and Guru Tattva, of course. That's explained in Sri Guru and His Grace. You can read that extensively. Anyway, traditionally, we're speaking here in general principles, but as we said about the activities and dealings of the spiritual master have a particular relish for the devotees. So you have your, biographies of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, the seventh Goswami, Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, and these different things, and different to see how the spiritual master is dealing in different ways, and these are very relishable. But if you want to ask, more personally, like my own experiences with Srila Maharaj, as I've said, several times, that my experience on initially meeting him was. His words or vibration was experienced by me simultaneously arising from my own being in complete concordance, and this for me was confirming the Shastra says the Mahant Guru is the external manifestation of Chaita Guru. and that I experience his divine grace as being in communion with the Paramatma. Well, that's a kind of another way to express the same thing. Of course, he had a great and vast erudition that he was very well known for, and people would approach him for that. Scriptural knowledge, and very sweet and compassionate nature. And someone said, apparently this person who said this wasn't a disciple, and someone even had some differences with him. They used to have some talk, debate talk. He says, a person of deep intelligence, sound common sense and disinterested nature. They very much appreciated him for that. Disinterested nature meaning not interested in it, doesn't mean not interested in anything. You have to be interested in things in order to be disinterested, if you see what I mean. Yeah. So meaning detachment from materially detached, which is, of course, would increase and come more with spiritual attachment. So it's a natural thing, not to be separately or artificially cultivated. Anyway, I got a few instructions directly from Srila Guru Maharaj, and once a very strong chastisement also. That was very invaluable teaching for me. And also he pointed me to different shastras to study in a letter, and it's part of the inconceivable tattva of Guru that he himself is thinking himself as a humble servant of the Lord. And the example Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, seeing his disciples coming to assist him in his service because he was unable or didn't have capacity or was unfit or something for that. So Krishna very mercifully sending the devotees to help him, and also engaging him in talking about the Lord, thus opening his own path to liberation, seeing like that. And so when speaking about the spiritual master in terms of one's, dealings or relationship with him, one does also have to be careful, because our nature, our tendency, the conditioned soul for self-love, vainglory and pride is very deep-rooted. So one can be talking about the spiritual master, but then subtly one's glorifying oneself. I had this relationship with him, he said these things to me, he personally told me these things, this kind of way, So then it ends up as self-glorification, not glorifying the Guru, which is the purpose of today. So that's that. I'll just like to finish with this, if I could just read this part in the beginning. It's written a long time ago by Sridhar Maharaj, 1930s, yeah. It's the introduction here to Sri Guru and His Grace. He says, to err is human, to err is inevitable for all, being not perfect. Still, no one wants to remain imperfect. There is an element within all that is animate that tends towards perfection. If it were not so, we would feel no want at all. Yeah, it means there's some difference, there's some gap. We want perfection, but we're not in the stage of perfection. So that is our want, our need, it's a tendency. Our tendency towards perfection is certainly very weak and limited, otherwise we could attain the goal at once. Our limited capacity and tendency for perfection makes room for the guide or Guru. The imperfect is not so if it is not in need of help, and that also from beyond itself. The perfect is not perfect if he cannot assert himself or help others, and that too of his own accord. So, the guidance to perfection or absolute truth is necessarily a function of the Absolute Himself, and the divine agent through whom this function manifests is Sri Guru, or the divine guide. Here Srila Guru Maharaj speaking on an extremely, on one way, very, very fundamental level, but also very high level simultaneously and inconceivably. In his commentary on the 10th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna is saying, I'm the source of everything, all material and spiritual worlds, everything emanates from me. The wise who know this perfectly always engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. So there, in his commentary, he has said, if Krishna is the source of everything, then he's the source of worship of himself. As Radharani, he's worshipping himself. So Sri Gurudev, that way, worshipping Krishna as Radharani. We know the two aspects, Radharani, and then fundamental level Nityananda Prabhu. For a seeker of the absolute truth, submission to the Guru is unavoidable. A class of thinkers believe, however, that when scientific research is possible, why cannot higher spiritual knowledge also be evolved from within? Remember, this was written in 1934, so at that time in India and Bengal, probably especially, was this big, so-called rationalistic scientific revolution thing going on in India. So it's particularly, the thing of the time with the scientific research. Ultimately, through that way we can find the absolute truth. And it may be true to a certain extent. Srila Gurudev says in Revealed Truth there that it's very astonishing. It's like a siddhi, what the scientists can do. In his own text, Patanjali Yoga, Patanjali says that intense focusing on something can actually produce a result which is like extraordinary, supramental, and that's a kind of siddhi, So yes, that can be done through science. These bring through the ether, just the technologies we have increasing all the time. So from that way, but that would only be to prove the existence of the absolute, of the cause of all causes, something like that. But we're talking here in relationship. We're talking the relationship of the soul, Atma to Paramatma, soul with the Lord. So he says, such people are ignorant of the most essential nature of absolute knowledge, that he alone is the absolute subject, and all else, including ourselves, constitutionally stand only as an object to his omniscient vision. So in other words, we can only know about him in a more direct and personal way as much as he allows himself to be seen or known or shown. So it's not that, just by putting, under a microscope we can understand that way. As if he would, he reserves the right, all rights reserved. It is impossible for the eye to see the mind. It can have some connection with the mind only when the latter cares to mind it. Essentially, the lower can't forcibly enter the higher. The higher can come down into the lower, like this. In the similar way, our connection with absolute knowledge depends mainly on his sweet will. We must solely depend on his agent, or the spiritual master, through whom he likes to distribute himself. So I won't read all of it, just the parts which... So to our best knowledge and sincerity, however, we should see not to submit to a false agent. Here, of course, we can't help ourselves very much, because in our present state we are mainly guided by our previous samskara or acquired nature. Yet although we are generally overpowered by habit, there is still the possibility of free choice to a certain extent, especially in the human species. Otherwise, correction becomes impossible, and punishment mere vengeance. So human society being, as Srila Saraswati Thakur would put it, the society of the cheaters and the cheated, you know. So there's many false agents, and they're compared in the Srimad Bhagavatam like crows, buzzards, herons and vultures, these inauspicious and carnivorous birds that prey on the weakness. You know, they eat the dead flesh of the carrion, you see. So, you know, just like the bird of prey flies very, very high, goes very high in the sky, and very, very sharp eyes, sharp vision, but with that, what, just looking for the dead matter, you know, looking to the flesh, you know. So these people in general are very much prey to the false agents, the false teachers. He says in this book, Srila Govinda Maharaj touches on that point, but he says, I can't say who is false or who isn't, and that's not my business. But I'm just giving the principle from the scripture and from the teachings. You know, but it's true. These people, they prey on people, you know, take their energy, take their money, and leave them with nothing. Yeah. As Prakashananda Saraswati said to Mahaprabhu when, after having his association for some time, his heart was softened and melted. And finally he came to the point, he fell at Mahaprabhu's feet and said, now I've realized that, you know, people were putting me on a big throne, similar to what like Bilva Mangal Thakur said, worship as the great monistic teacher and philosopher, head of the Mayavadi school. But actually now I've realized I've got nothing, absolutely nothing, and you have everything. You are everything and you have everything. So please give me what you have. And Mahaprabhu blessed him after that. So Sri Guru manifests himself mainly in a twofold way, as a director from within and a preceptor from without. That's a good description, right? Director from within and preceptor from without. Both functions of the Absolute help an individual soul, a disciple, to reach the Absolute goal. In our fallen state, we cannot catch the proper direction to the inner guide. So the merciful manifestation of the preceptor without is our sole help and hope. But at the same time, it is only by the grace of the Guru within that we can recognize the real preceptor without and submit to his holy feet. A bona fide disciple must always remain fully awake to the fact that his highest spiritual fortune is but a gracious grant from the Absolute Lord, and not a matter of right to be demanded or fought out. Constitutionally, we are equipped only to be proper recipients of God's favour. In this connection, it should be clearly understood that an individual soul can never be substantially the same as the Absolute Person. Not even in his liberated or fully realized condition can an individual soul be one with Godhead in this sense, monistically one. The misconception of oneness has been introduced from the slothful non-discrimination of the Absolute Personality, from the luminous orb around his eternal, spiritual and blissful home. So there's a different aspects of the Absolute. Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavaniti, Shabdite. So realized in three aspects, but all are absolute. So those who realize the Absolute as Brahman, they're God realized. Those who realize Paramatma Tattva, also God realized. And those bhaktas, realization of Bhagavan. So like sunshine, sun planet, and sun globe, and sun God, like this. But there also, there's a difference. You know, if we can appreciate the sunshine in this room, what there is of it, but if the sun is directly in this room, they're all finished. So how can you say that's the same? It's not the same. But still, sunshine, sun globe, sun God. Brahmano hi pratishtaham. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, I am the source of the Brahman. So, in fact, an individual soul constitutes only a part of a particular power of intermediate value of the Supreme Lord, Tatastha Shakti, and as such he's capable of being converted from both sides. He differs from the absolute entity both in quantity and quality, and is merely a dependent entity on the absolute. So actually, we also, the Jiva soul is different also in quality, not just, generally we say one in quality, different in quantity. That's a general expression to give the idea that the soul and Krishna have of the same spiritual nature, but not absolutely the same. Yeah. And so, of course, where even within the Godhead himself, there's relativity, percentage-wise. Narayan, Baladev, Krishna, like this. So, in other words, in other words, the absolute Lord Krishna is the master, and an individual jiva soul is his constitutional subordinate or servant. Such a relationship is constant and really wholesome for the jiva. The apprehension of slavery doesn't arise because of his free choice and immense positive gain. In other words, apprehension, don't be afraid, I don't want to be a slave, that's terrible. That's the worst thing people think.